Matt, what's happening? Welcome to the Meat Mafia podcast.
Awesome to be here. Yeah, no, thank you guys so much for having me.
Yeah, we're really excited to have this conversation with you. We were saying we really owe this to our mutual friend, James Connolly of the Sustainable Dish podcast. So shout out to him. And you come highly recommended from him. We know that you're a first generation Bison Rancher out of Bridger, Montana. And when I was doing some prep work for the podcast, there was this really cool piece on your Instagram. It was a feature that you had in the Mountain Outlaw magazine. And I just wanted to read that quote for our audience because I think it just gives really good insight into your mission and your tone, if that's cool.
Oh yeah. Awesome. And yeah, big shout out to James. He's the man. He's awesome. So yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Yeah. So the quote is, we're different and we know we're different. We're not pretending to be something we're not. We're first generation. We raised bison and weren't born and raised in Montana, but we have a fierce love for this place, and ranching is not a game or a hobby to us. We're here, we're passionate about ranching and what we do, and we're committed to regenerative agriculture and taking care of this land. Is that special for you to kind of like hear that quote just played back to you?
Yeah, no, that's cool. You know, I mean, we are first generation ranchers, and we're as I said there, I mean, our thing is that like we wear that on our sleeve. You know, we're not pretending to be fourth generation Montana ranchers. We didn't grow up ranching. We have like boatloads and boatloads of admiration and respect for our neighbors who are multi-generation Montana ranchers. But we're not, and we're new at this, and we're still learning, and we've made mistakes. And so our whole thing, I guess, it's like, we just want to be authentic. You know, we just want to be real about who we are and what this experience has been for us and continues to be. And yeah, I think, you know, with so many people moving to Montana now, it's like, yeah, I mean, we're very serious about ranching, our ranch, our business, and what we do, and super passionate about it. So yeah, it's cool. Appreciate you reading that.
That's awesome. And it sounds like this wasn't always the path for you. And we know that you're located, you know, right outside Bozeman, Montana, which is a booming city, but you've also had these other careers, a law career, and then also a career in policy for a few years. And then you kind of make the switch over to regenerative bison farming. So I think we'd love to just kind of unpack that whole path towards becoming a regenerative farmer and just how you got to where you are today.
Sure. You know, get comfortable, because it's just, you know, it's a long story, but yeah, I mean, I'll try to keep it as short as possible and then we can dive into it. But basically, so yeah, as I was saying, you know, born and raised outside Chicago, always, you know, from my earliest memories, love nature and the outdoors. And then in college, this amazing guy, Kim Montgomery, introduced me to hunting. And that really, you know, it changed the way I look at the natural world and the world and food. And it had a big influence on me. Became passionate about environmental conservation in high school and college, and had fallen in love with the West and Montana in high school and college, and ultimately went to law school. Partly had an interest in being an environmental lawyer, which I ended up not pursuing. And then also I knew I ultimately wanted to live in a place, you know, like Montana, where you had immediate access to the outdoors, and thought, you know, hey, every town needs a lawyer. So went to law school, ended up clerking for a federal magistrate judge in Chicago my first year out. Amazing guy, Judge Denlow. And then 2 years at a big firm there, which again, I knew what wasn't for me long-term, but a good place to start. And then in 2008, my wife, Sarah, and I, we got married, quit our jobs, got married, went on a honeymoon, moved to Montana. And then I ended up getting a job with NRDC, the Natural Resources Defense Council, you know, to scratch that itch for environmental conservation work. And so did environmental policy work there for a decade, spent a long time there. And the main issue I worked on was bison, issues around management of bison. and of wild bison, and got more and more passionate about food and hunting. We had 2 kids along the way, and was just really craving to do something tangible, land-based, conservation-based here in Montana. And I literally read a newspaper article in the Bozeman Daily Chronicle about the National Bison Association having their summer conference at Big Sky, and that the bison industry was growing and they were looking for producers. And I'm not bullshitting at all. Like, I read it and I was like, wow, that would be super cool. Clearly not for me, but boy, for someone that'd be cool. And, went on with my day, and, but then like months later, it just was still kicking around my brain. And then I read Buffalo for the Broken Heart by Dan O'Brien, who started Wild Idea in South Dakota. And when I read about the field harvest process as a meat hunter, that just like was a real light bulb moment of like, wow, it's time. Like there's something here, and we should get serious about this. And I reached out to, I guess I knew enough to do a Google search. So like I literally Googled, Bison Ranching consultant, and came across this incredible guy, Roland Cruz, who's based here in Bozeman. And I went to we met for lunch, and I was telling him my story, and he kind of cut me off, and he's like, look, you should come to my holistic management workshop on a bison ranch. And I took it both as, one, like this would be good for you, you'd benefit from this. And 2, as a challenge, like, are you a dreamer or are you serious? And came home, talked to Sarah, and she was, amazingly supportive. She's like, you got to go. Like, who knows where this could lead? And I went and just like loved it. And that, got more serious about it. And then we found this land. It's the only land we looked at in person, got it under contract with as long a closing date as possible, continued to, at that point, I call it like went into sponge mode, just tried to absorb and learn as much as possible, and met a lot of wonderful people along the way who were really generous with their time and knowledge. And the end of it, I guess, would be like, I called it like, I still do, like the Bison Ranch pipe dream. Cause like, I really didn't think it would actually happen. And even when we had the land under contract, like I held it very loosely because I just was waiting for someone to like pull me aside and be like, have they told you about X? And I'd be like, that's why I can't do it. But we just kept putting like one foot in front of the other until someone told us to stop. And the more we worked on it and invested in it, with, time and emotion and those sorts of things, we just were like, decided we got to do this. So we started it from scratch in 2018, and here we are.
That's an incredible story, man. It's cool to hear how it's like, it seems like when you were younger, you were already thinking environmental. It's funny how like when you're younger, you start to show the actual traits and your actual interests. And then maybe we run away from those things, and then it ends up like leading us back towards that path. It's kind of like we intuitively know what we're interested in. But Matt, one of the things that we were particularly interested in about this conversation is that we've had a lot of cattle ranchers on the show, unbelievable people. But you're our second bison rancher that we've had on. And I was just genuinely curious, did you think about beef and going into that space, or was there something about bison that just spoke to you that kind of knew that was your calling for ranching?
Yeah, great question. So first, it's funny. I mean, sometimes people think because like if you ranch bison, you must not like cattle. Yeah. When nothing could be further from the truth. Like I love cattle. I love beef. As I said, I have just so much respect and admiration for our neighbors who are amazing ranchers and amazing people. But for us, we came into this through bison. So I'd been working on bison issues at NRDC for years. So bison were in my life, like working on them. When I say working on them, I mean like from a policy standpoint, going to meetings, reading about them constantly. And I've just fallen, I guess head over heels in love with the species, just like fascinated by them. So when I read that article about bison ranching, that's what really clicked. But I always, and there's certainly a parallel universe where we're doing this, with cattle. It just happened to be for us. This, my world was kind of centered, my professional world was really centered around bison for a number of years. And so bison were the logical, thing for us.
Can you talk about the importance of bison and the relationship with the land? Because I think specifically in North America, bison have played a critical role in creating that topsoil that was once this amazing asset for North America, but now it's like slowly depleting. And I think just getting that history of how bison played a role in developing that, and then what's happened, kind of in like the late 1800s, seems like basically they got hunted off. But I'd love to hear that story.
Sure. So, yeah, so bison, they're this, I always describe them as like, they're just the biggest badass in North America. They're the largest animal in North America, and they can run fast and jump high. They're super agile. They predate the Ice Age. They've been here for thousands and thousands of years. There used to be multiple, subspecies of bison, and the others went extinct during the Ice Age. And then the two subspecies that survived were plains bison, which is what we have here in the US, and then woods bison, which is what they have up in Canada and or in northern Canada. There are some plains bison in southern Canada. But yeah, so at some point, they estimate 30 to 60 million bison in North America, and their historic range went from Canada down into Mexico and basically coast to coast. So if you think about, the adaptability of a species that can survive, a Canadian winter and an Arizona summer, pretty hardy, adaptable animal. And in the, kind of mid to late 1800s, a market developed for their hides, hide hunting, and they were decimated. Like, they were killed, pushed right to the edge of the cliff of extinction. And actually, at one point in the late 1800s, people thought they were going to go extinct. And the Smithsonian in DC, they sent one of their scientists, William Hornaday, out to Montana to kill a couple bison and bring them back to DC to put in a museum, because they were like, this animal's going extinct, but we need to show future generations, hey, this large animal once roamed this continent. It's gone now. But fortunately, they didn't go extinct. The numbers got, below 1,000. And they, for a variety of efforts, they were able to, save the species and then slowly restore the species. And now they estimate there's around 500,000 bison in North America. So it's still, a tiny fraction of what was once here. And yeah, you think of 30 to 60 million bison, but also, millions of elk and pronghorn and all these other grazing animals moving across the Great Plains, grazing, pooping, peeing, leading to, some of the greatest grasslands on earth. And, I think ultimately, so flash forward, it's 2023. And I'm a big believer, pride myself in being like a practical, pragmatic thinker. And here we are in 2023. And it's why I love the saying, it's not the cow, it's the how. And so, at the end of the day, out here in the West and the Great Plains, this landscape co-evolved with grazing animals. And so removing animals from the landscape is completely unnatural. This landscape evolved with animals. And a lot's happened since, in the last 200 years. But we are where we are in 2023. And so, as I said, this landscape needs animals. That's how it evolved. And so whether you're doing it with bison or you're doing it with cattle or you're doing it with other species on a ranch in a managed setting, it comes down to that ranch and that ranch's practices. And so you can have that animal impact with bison, and you can also have it with cattle. So I think that, we're just realistically not going to go back to a place where we've got 30 to 60 million bison wandering freely across North America. But I think, one of maybe the most important takeaway in this, contemporary conversation around food and land and animals and how to eat and how to grow food is that like this continent evolved with grazing animals. So removing animals from this landscape is unnatural, and animals have a very important role to play on the landscape.
Before we get into the episode, let's talk about Fawn Bone Broth's carnivore blend.
100%. Yeah, we've been huge fans of bone broth the last few months. It's really fueled our carnivore journey. Bone broth is incredibly nourishing, especially on a carnivore, animal-based, or just any type of diet, to be honest with you. And what's great about Fawn is that they're a very simple, pure product. So their product is just boiled bones, water, salt, and most of their products have spices like turmeric, cayenne, cracked pepper, but they actually just came out with their carnivore broth, which is very simple, chicken bone broth, water, and salt too. So they're eliminating all their spices and just giving you something very pure that won't disrupt the gut.
Yeah, I think one of the things we talk about with the elimination diet is the fact that there's so many things that do actually affect how your body reacts to the food you put in your body. And the fact that they're just doing a pure bone broth with bones and just the minimal ingredients, I think is huge. And the carnivore audience will love this one. Fawn does regenerative bone, so it's really high quality stuff. Go check it out. Use our promo code in the link below.
Yep. Code MAFIA will get you 15% off your first order.
Absolutely. Matt, is it true that there are a small number of ranches that control the majority of that 500,000 bison? Like I've heard Turner, maybe it's like Ted Turner controls a bunch of bison or something like that. Is that true?
Sort of, yeah. So of that 500,000, the vast majority of those are on like ours. And Ted Turner would certainly be the largest bison rancher. He's got multiple bison ranches in the West with tens of thousands of animals. And, you know, he and his team have done amazing things for the restoration of bison. Like he's a true conservation hero. And then there's a small percentage, a much smaller percentage of that 500,000 that are in what they call conservation herds. So whether that's a national park or a state park or a nature conservancy property, and yeah, collectively that makes up the approximately 500,000 bison that we have today.
What would I know you're not a cattleman or a cattle farmer, but rancher, I guess. What's the difference between raising cows and raising bison? Like, what would you say the biggest difference is?
I mean, so I guess first I'd say they're more similar than not, you know, like they, at the end of the day, they're both the large grazing animals, that have what I believe and always say, like they have these magical stomachs where they can not just exist, but thrive off grass. And grass is very simple. You know, it's sunlight, water, soil, grazes grass. A bison or a cow or an elk or someone comes through and chews it off and walks away, and then it keeps growing in the summer. So I think they're more similar than not. I think the differences would be, you know, bison, and this is my take in my experience, or that like when everything is going well with bison, it's great. But like if you have a bison jumping the fence, it's really stressful. And then I think, you know, I guess also, you know, I'm not a cattle rancher, and within the cattle ranching world, there's so many different ways to ranch that I think that I think that there are cattle ranches that are very similar to bison ranches, and there are, yeah, it just really varies. I think it's hard to paint with a broad brush.
Matt, if a bison jumps the fence, what the hell do you do in that situation?
I mean, the short answer is you kill it. You know, like you can't have a bison in your herd that's comfortably jumping fences and then teaching others to do it. So, you know, if it happens once and it comes back and it doesn't happen again, it's not a big deal. But we had our first real issue with that last spring, like March, April, May into June, took years off my life. But ultimately it was this one bull, and he ultimately came back, and we'd already sold him, for meat, and I was able to kill him, and we haven't had, knock on every piece of wood around, we haven't had any issues since then. But that kind of comes back to, like, I guess with bison, like, you need good fences, you need some good infrastructure, and it's not what you think. Like, it's not 12-foot fences. Our fences aren't that tall. Like, they're wildlife friendly. Pronghorn can go under, and deer, elk, and moose can go over. But we use high tensile fencing. The middle wire is hot or electric, and the bison are smart. They know, they're fence trained. They know not to touch the fence. And then it really comes down to management, like making sure that they've got plenty of food, grass, plenty of water, and just being vigilant, checking your fences, make sure that an elk or something didn't trash one of your fences. So it's more like, I'd say with bison, it's the old, an ounce of prevention's worth a pound of cure. Like, it's way easier to be proactive on the front end and just keep things going well, because once it starts to go to the other side, it's a much bigger headache. So I think that's one difference with bison and cattle is I think that, like, that bison last summer was, just created quite a headache here.
Let's take a minute to talk about some of the sponsors and brands who support the show.
Who are you thinking?
I was thinking about Carnivore Bar. What are your thoughts on Carnivore Bar?
I mean, it's unbelievable. It's an unbelievable product. We were lucky enough to have the founder, Philip Meese, on the show a few months ago, and he was able to send us a bunch of product when we started the relationship, and absolutely loved it. I mean, it's a minimum ingredient product, beef, tallow, salt, and then they do have a honey flavored option as well. But it's so nice to have a bar that's like 3 to 4 ingredients. And like, when you're following a carnivore diet, it's really tough to find products that are in line with that specific diet,
Yeah, for me, it kind of hits like the holy trinity of what you're looking for when you're looking for food. So it's nutrient dense, it's convenient, and it tastes great. And as you said, most people who are trying to eat healthy, the convenience factor is kind of a tough part. So just being able to have something you can grab on the go, know that you're going to have that nutrition for the day, it's huge.
Yeah, and we were lucky enough, we got to actually see their factory too in Missouri, and they're just doing things the right way. I love how they offer an option for like carnivore purists where it's just beef, tallow, salt. And then they also have an animal-based option too. If you do want a little bit of sweetness, a little bit of variety, they have a honey in that option. And they're just people that are doing things the right way. They're very mission focused. They're carnivores themselves. And, we're always on the go. We're traveling. We've taken a bunch of flights together. To have a bar that has 30 grams of fat too, like, that's huge from an energy density standpoint, right?
Yeah, he checks all the boxes, or the company checks all the boxes. And I just think the fact that they're sourcing from a regenerative farm as well, and Joyce Farms, just a win-win.
100%. So Carnivore Bar. So we got the affiliate link, and then it's code MAFIA for 10% off.
One of the other farms that supports us is Perennial Pastures, another regenerative farm out of San Diego. Our experience with Kevin Munoz, the owner, we had him on the show, a young first-generation rancher who's really empowered by this movement of regenerative agriculture and really wants to be a leader in the space. I think our conversation with him was so insightful, just in terms of how mission-focused he is and how he really thinks about his farm as a business and wanting it to be here 50, 100 years down the road, even though he's just the first generation of it. And I think just being able to spend time with him out in San Diego was kind of the perfect indication of that, where we got to go have a meal with him at his house, hang out with his wife and kids. Like, what an amazing person. And I think his mission focus around raising really high quality beef and restoring nutrients to the soil is just one of those rare missions that I think everyone can get around.
Yeah, he has such a commitment to really feeding the local community in San Diego, in the San Diego County first and foremost, but he's also passionate about feeding the community around the country. So I know they've invested a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of resources to being able to order beef in bulk on their website. So I know that they now offer quarter, half, whole cows directly off the website. They have that great ancestral blend ground beef product. So it actually has organ grinds mixed into the ground beef. So you're getting the benefits of like an ounce or so of organ meat, but because it's in the ground beef, you really can't taste it at all. And I think, to your point, Harry, just another amazing person. Kev was someone that he was following a paleo diet in college and started realizing, wow, when I nourish my body with real foods, I feel amazing. Had a really successful stint in tech, but realized that there was just something else that he was passionate about. So he's one of those rare cases where, he put his money where his mouth is, and he's a first generation farmer, just, bootstrapping this thing, raising money, and just so passionate about feeding the community. Just an amazing guy.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for listening. Now we're going to go back to the show. Have you seen any changes on your land since you introduced the bison, whether it's, more species of different types of animals coming in, better water retention of the soil, things like that?
We have Roland, who I talked about, and then another consultant, Alyssa LaChance, out of the Flathead area. We're working with both of them, and so they have set up monitoring transects on the ranch that so we can, at the end of the day, like we're talking the talk, and we want to make sure that we're also walking the walk. So they have these monitoring transects where they are measuring like the amount of bare ground, the species, like plant species diversity, all these different criteria on the landscape to see, are we improving the land or are we not? So I think from like a big picture standpoint, it's still a little early, but we have noticed a few changes, and I think it's less bison and more our management, like where the house and the barn and this area where we're located, there's a couple of creeks that come together, and it's just a really highly productive part of the ranch. And there used to be a bunch of horses and goats and all sorts of stuff here, and it was grazed super low year round, and we let it come back. And I think it was like the second year, maybe, we had a bunch of barn swallows showed up and started building nests in the eaves of our barn. That was like the one thing that I was like, I'm like, we didn't see those the first couple of years. Yeah. And I think that was literally just like, there's just a little more grass and life and insects and bugs and stuff like in this immediate area. Mm-hmm. But I'm like super fascinated by what we'll see over time. And ultimately, it's ultimately a check on us and our management and making sure that we're doing a good job.
Right.
Yeah. It's going to be so cool just to document that whole journey and just see what happens over the next 5 to 10 years. Matt, something that we're particularly interested in is the fact that you and your wife are first gen ranchers. And part of me saying that is that we have a number of listeners of the show that reach out saying, hey, maybe I'd like to do some homesteading, or maybe I'd even like to start ranching. And I know that you had mentioned maybe around like 2017, you go to this holistic management workshop, you're inspired, you want to start going into bison. Like, what are the next steps that you actually take towards building a bison ranch and getting that up and running?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I would say, there's the first and foremost, like the obvious practical steps of like, I think trying to read as much as possible about, one, I'd say join the National Bison Association. It's a really great group with tons of information. They have a book called The New Producer's Handbook that's really helpful because there's a lot of different ways to be in the bison world. And so, I think, kind of learning about the bison ranching world, and then deciding like, where do you want to fit in? Like, what kind of ranch do you want to be? And how do you plan to, make money? And because as I said earlier, each ranch is different. So I think like that would be kind of step one. And then through that, it'll help you decide, is this something I want to do or not? And then, once you've decided on that, I think putting a business plan together, particularly like the narrative part, like writing, like what's your plan? Like, how are you going to do this? And how are you going to sell? Are you going to sell meat or animals or, and who are your customers? And, and then really, and then at the same time, I guess, the quantitative part, starting to put together numbers on a spreadsheet and like playing around with that. Like, what are your costs and what's your anticipated revenue? One of the main principles in modern day ranching is you got to keep your costs down. So, how can you, particularly for a first generation startup ranch, how can you keep your costs down? And then there are plenty of ways to do it, but that's like super important, is keeping your costs down. And then, because people ask me all the time, like people reach out for advice. And, one thing I always say, like finding land is hard. So, two things. One, if you can lease land, like that's without question the fastest, most efficient way to get into ranching, because you don't have to buy land, and buying land's really expensive. So finding a lease, that would be the best. And then kind of related to that, if you're geographically flexible, like that's a big advantage. If you're like, I'm open to whether it's, Colorado or Texas or, Arkansas, like wherever looking for a good deal or a lease. And then the last one, and I was saving it for last because I truly believe it's the most important one, would be the, like the gut check piece of it. Because I've talked to like multiple people about this and I've heard other people talk about it and write about it, but it's like the appeal of ranching, I think James and I talked about this, like is, it's so obvious, right? Like if you just Google like ranching in Montana and you see these, beautiful mountains and beautiful grasslands and sunsets, and you're working outside, and if I guess some people probably wouldn't be attracted to that, but if you're remotely interested in it, that's only going to make you more excited, right? Like it sounds great, it's romantic, it's beautiful, but the reality can often be quite different. It's hard. There's lots of trade-offs involved. Depending on what you're doing previously. It's definitely not a Monday through Friday 9-to-5 job. At times you're thrown crazy curveballs from weather or from your animals. It's very physical work. Like, you have to, like, I tweaked my lower back randomly last weekend, and it just as a reminder that like I have to be physically fit and healthy to do this work. Like, the way that we have it structured with field harvesting and everything. So I think like what Sarah and I did is we just spent a lot of time playing devil's advocate with each other, and like really, you can't put yourself in those shoes. It's impossible, but trying as hard as you can in those conversations to like think through what those hard days are going to look like. Because the easy days are obvious, but what are those hard days going to look like? And do you want to sign up for that? And we did that, and like I'm now, like I love it. Like it's an awesome fit for us and me, and like I'm like wildly grateful that we get to do it. But it's not for everyone. Like it's and so I think really thinking. So, anyways, like I just think that gut check piece is really important.
How long did it take you to really feel comfortable knowing that this was the right path for you? Because I'm sure there was probably points where you felt some doubt within those first few months, or like 6 to 12 months in, you're like, oh man, this is a lot more than I expected.
Yeah, no, it's funny. So I guess there's two parts of it. There's the first part of like getting to the point of saying, we're going to go all in and do this. And that took years. Like, and I say that because I have had this entrepreneurial itch for a long time, and I had considered other ideas and opportunities, and I always chickened out, whether it was a bad idea or it was just pure, it's too risky. And each one of those, I think, starts to like, it helps build the backbone to do something. my younger brother and we used to talk about it, and he'd be like, "What's new?" And I'd be like, I'm like, "I'm the boy who cried wolf. Like, I've got another idea, but I'm not going to do it." But I think each time you go through that and come out the other side, your brain, I think your backbone gets a little stronger, and also the lens through which you're analyzing opportunities gets better and sharper. And so when the Bison Ranch came along, I'd already considered other things and hadn't done it. And I've said this before, but it's the absolute truth. Like, at some point, we put so much into this that the risk of not doing it became greater than the risk of doing it. So like that summer of 2018, we were like, look, we might like horrifically fail. But we got to go for it. Like, otherwise we'll regret this for as long as we live. And, but yeah, I mean, I had like a total insecurity about it. Like, I just thought, like, if you didn't grow up ranching, you can't be a rancher. And, was just, nervous. Like, I was like, I know nothing. I mean, I know some things, but really I knew nothing. And, but as I met people, and I met a couple, this one guy who, was doing it and had no background in ranching, like that was a big confidence booster. And then, I think, like, for me, I'm sure everyone's different, but for me, the hardest part was jumping, like getting to the edge of the cliff and jumping. And then, like, strangely, like, once you jump, well, then you're just in it. So like, there's not a lot of time for like navel gazing and like, self-reflection and, sitting around and thinking about it. Like, all of a sudden you got bison on the land, and you got, you're trying to build a business. And so I'd say that for me, the hardest part was having, I guess the guts and the backbone to make the leap. And then once I did it, it just was time to get to work. And I made plenty of mistakes, like I burned a truck down. I massively broke my ankle. But like with a ranch and just any small business owner, like when those things happen, like you throw a pity party for yourself for like a night. And then you wake up the next day and it's like, time to get to work. Like, no one's going to do this for me. I can't pass this off to, a colleague and be like, hey, I'm going to call in sick for a couple of weeks. And with all that said, we're very lucky. Again, our neighbors have helped us tremendously in those, like, when we've had like real problems, our neighbors have been amazing. But mainly, yeah, just think like, there's a lot of work to do. And so you don't spend it's funny, like podcasts or interviews is when I spend more time like reflecting on stuff. Yeah. Otherwise it's more like I have a long to-do list. I'm field harvesting a bison tomorrow. I got stuff this afternoon. You're just in it. And I'm just very grateful that I love it. It's been, there's been hard moments, and there are days where it's really hard. But I wouldn't trade it for the world. Absolutely love it.
That's such good perspective. It does seem like when you have more idle time and you're just sitting around and thinking, that's when like the thoughts of anxiety or overthinking, it's almost like you can over contemplate. Whereas when you just fill your days with like really productive things and harvests and you're out there ranching, it's almost like you don't have time to overthink because you're just doing stuff. So I feel like that's really practical advice, because that was going to be one of my questions for you, is like thinking back to 10 years ago, you were this guy that maybe had some great ideas and you weren't ready to pull the trigger yet. Like, how do you actually get like trigger happy or like develop that backbone to just go all in on something? I feel like that's like the $1 million question that a lot of people don't have the answer to.
Yeah, no, I think, so one, I totally agree. Like, yeah, when you're sitting around thinking about stuff, that's the worst. Like, I hate that. When you're actually in action mode, like, life is good, and like field harvest days are just the best because I'm away from my, I'm out of, I don't have cell service. I'm in it. Like, it was cool. I took my wife, Sarah, along for her first field harvest a couple months ago. And she was like, that word flow state gets thrown around a lot these days, but she was like, man, it's cool to see, like, this is truly your flow state. And it's true. It's like, you're not thinking about anything else. Like, you're not thinking about emails or that you got to reply to, or texts, or this or that, or what you're going to have for dinner. You're just in the moment. And in this day and age, like those moments where you can be completely locked in and present on something are, seem to be rarer and rarer. And so I'm very grateful when those to have those moments. But to answer your question, that it is the $1 million question of like, when do you jump? And for me, for my journey, like, I had analysis, what they call, analysis paralysis, right? Like, you could say, hey, we're going to start a coffee shop in Austin next month. And you could analyze that like forever, right? Like coffee beans and different regions and how to roast them and all this different stuff. And I now look back, and I basically wanted to create a fully operational, profitable company in my brain, and then just like walk into it. And that's impossible. Like, you have to be comfortable with some risk. And so for me, it was like working through those other ideas and either realizing, that's a bad idea, or chickening out. I realized, and then later being like, oh man, you know what? Like, that was actually a pretty good idea. That got me to the point where I'm like, you have to have some tolerance for risk, and some tolerance for the unknown, because there's no other way to do it. Like, and so with the ranch, that I really focused on like the business plan, the numbers, and the gut check piece. Like fencing is a great example. 5 years before starting the ranch, I would have done analysis paralysis on the fence, right? Like, analyzed fencing and this fence and that fence and how high and this high and blah, 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 blah. But I was like, there are other bison ranches that have figured out fencing. I can worry about that later. Like, that's not like some of those nuts and bolts, like, you can figure those out later. And so that was very helpful for me, is sort of like letting go of that stuff. But it's uncomfortable. And like, I remember, again, I'm like, haven't thought of this, but like, you start to reflect in these conversations. I actually, I found some good quotes that I printed out and I put above my desk at work and on my dresser at home. Because like, there are times where you just, tons of self-doubt where you're like what? Like, I mean, I'm laughing. It's like, we're going to start a bison ranch. Like, it's like, that's insane. Like, that's crazy. And so you of course doubt it. And you're like, this is we got 2 kids. This is a bad idea. And so, but like, the quotes were just around like, change is hard and growth, like it's going to be uncomfortable, but like, that's just how it is, like, I think it's impossible, at least for me, it would be impossible to do something like this without some discomfort and anxiety and, nerves and doubt around it. And you gotta, I think for each person it's different, but for me, I was able to put enough there that I was like, I believe in this. And like, I think that there's something here and we need to go for it.
Maybe all 3 of us are masochistic, but I think there is something about taking risk and kind of getting closer to that flame and getting comfortable with the discomfort that is really enriching, because it does force you to grow. And I know for ourselves, like with this show and with all the things that we're trying to do in the space, it's like, you do have to be ready to take some chances and roll the dice at times and not really know what the outcome is going to be, but just know that like, you know what you want and know that you can like get through it. Right. So I think that concept of taking risks is a little bit overstated in a lot of ways. Like, I think it imposes a lot of fear on people, but once you do it, it kind of like everything flows after that.
No, it's so well said. And I couldn't agree more. It's like, yeah, I mean, I know, it's similar. I know you guys are both, like fitness, health, like fanatics. And I think there's a lot of parallels of like setting a goal and being like, I'm going to do this. And like, you're not going to let yourself quit. Because if you quit, you're just going to feel so horrible about, at least for me, I mean, you're going to feel so horrible about yourself. And it gives you, it puts you, it just, I don't know, it puts good sideboards on you. And so like the ranch, that's a big goal with consequences. And man, it's a big motivator, and yeah.
Definitely. And I'm sure that having an amazing wife and partner like Sarah really helps you have that skin in the game and push you forward. And it's almost like in some ways, like having Harry as a co-host, that was super helpful for me, because like I had these thoughts 5 years ago when I was living in New York, and I was like, oh, I love all these nutrition podcasts. I love these supplements. Like I would love to be able to do that myself one day. And then I would just overcomplicate the gear that I needed, or like, oh, I don't know enough, or the imposter syndrome. And now people are coming to us and they're like, wow, you guys have recorded so many episodes in a year. What's the secret? It was like, we were literally just two guys that were doing it over Zoom, and we're just keeping each other accountable, and like having the accountability and having a partner can like give you that confidence to kind of like push you to that next level.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, well said. I mean, Sarah is just, an amazing human on many levels, and, could not have done this without her and her support. And there's hard times of like self-doubt, and somebody to pick you up or just listen to you. It's huge. So absolutely.
Matt, I was curious, you had mentioned this field harvest a few times, and we've had the opportunity to unpack the concept of death and just the harvest and what that means. Because there is, I think if you go to the grocery store, you don't get this experience, but if you go and talk to your rancher, you do get to get a little bit closer to your food system and kind of get a little bit closer to that sacred nature of our human connection to the food that we eat. So I'm just interested in learning more about the field harvest, how you got to be doing that, and just in general, like how you think about pulling the trigger and really like making it something that's more sacred than what we've gotten accustomed to today.
Yeah, no, super great and important question. So how I got there, well, one, I didn't know it existed. And then when I read Dan O'Brien's book, Buffalo with a Broken Heart, he pioneered the modern day, method of field harvesting. And as I was thinking about the Bison Ranch, I'm a big I love ranching, and I like each year it seems that each year we have under our belt as ranchers, the more that I love ranching and just have so much respect for ranchers, because it's hard work, and like seeing my neighbors who've been doing this for decades and decades, like it amazes me. So there's lots of different ways to do it. But for me with bison, because they haven't been domesticated, like when I was thinking about it and it was rolling around my brain, each to his or her own. But for me, like shipping bison to a slaughterhouse just wasn't something I was interested in doing. And then when I read Dan's book and learned about, you drive out in the pasture and shoot a bison in the head, it sounds to your average person like, whoa, that's like crazy. Like that's horrible. But the reality is it's like, no, that's like wonderful and humane. And like, and again, like from a business standpoint, like I had just met more and more people that, they were like, like I'm done with meat. Like I've seen Food Inc. I've read too many books, too many documentaries. I'm just done. And I don't hunt, but if my neighbor kills an elk and gives me 30 pounds, I'm like, oh my God, I'm all over it. And I'm like, oh, so you're not really done with meat. You're done with like kind of the industrial meat complex portrayed in documentaries, which like I totally get, right? Like, I mean, you read about like, hog operations, some of these confined hog operations and chicken. I mean, it's horrible. So I was just like, man, there's something there. And I think more and more people would connect with that. So that's what got us there. And I was lucky when we were in the process of getting our bison. Wild Idea, the company Dan founded, they were actually going to do a field harvest on the ranch where we were getting our bison. So I got to see Wild Idea in action, and they were like so awesome and professional and very, very gracious to answer a lot of questions. So I got to learn from them, how as far as the actual killing part and what they do. And so what it entails, like tomorrow morning, is driving out into the herd. So we run our bison as one herd year round. They move around the ranch. So I drive out into the herd, and they know me. They know my truck, and and then I know who our meat animals are by their ear tags. And it's the first meat animal that provides me with the perfect shot. And the perfect shot is a meat animal, like maybe 15 to 20 yards. I stay in the truck and put a little like rifle rest over the arm or the rear view mirror. They're more tolerant of you when you're in the truck, and it just gives you a better rifle rest. And then so a bison that's within 15 to 20 yards with no bison in front of it, no bison behind it. And from a safety standpoint, it's not skylined on a ridge, like it's got, a hill or something, or I'm shooting down. And then it's a, headshot, forehead, a little bit above the eyes, between the eyes. You can kind of triangulate like where the brain is, if it's turning its head or something. And it's an intense thing. Like it, it's so different because like, I love to hunt, and like elk hunting, for example. Like most days you go elk hunting in the mountains, you don't get an elk, you don't even see an elk. You're going for the experience. But like tomorrow, when I open the gate, like I know I'm killing a bison. So it's a real different feeling. And I always say, and I mean this, like if I from when I, sharpen my knives in the morning, check my rifle, fire a couple shots to make sure that it's on, drive out, open the gate, drive out to the herd. If I feel nothing through that, like we got a problem, So it's like I feel adrenaline and nerves, and it's really around wanting to make sure everything goes perfectly. And then at the very end, like it's a really weird thing, because it's at the end when I finally have that perfect shot, and I'm got a bison, a gorgeous animal, and I love these animals so much. This gorgeous bison literally looking me in the eyes 15 yards away, and I've got the crosshairs of the rifle just above its eyes. And I'll often like take a deep breath, and your eye might get tired. So you kind of have to like step back from the scope, and you look at the bison, and then you go back. It's this weird, like there's part of it that, you love that animal, and like, you're about to kill it, and you feel all sorts of stuff because of that. But then at the same time, like I so strongly believe in what we're doing it and the way we're doing it, that it feels good. But in that moment, it's definitely like it's more. I wouldn't say it feels good in that moment. In that moment, it's more nerves and adrenaline. Basically, like stay calm. Just make this perfect. Stay calm. Make this perfect. And then once it's boom, it's down, and lift it up and bleed it. And then it's, then it's time to get to work on field dressing it. Then you're kind of in that flow state of just like working. And then when I'm driving it to the butcher, say an hour and a half later, that at that point, like I have a real feeling of like satisfaction and contentment, just because like I believe in what we're doing. I believe that, that like, it's like, I always say it's like, it's as ethical and humane as it gets for food, and not just for meat, like for food. It's like, I know you guys know all this stuff, and James, Diana are the experts, but like, what does Diana say? There's no such thing as a bloodless diet, right? Like we're all killing stuff through all sorts of different ways. But in that case, like that bison had a great life. One, that never felt a thing, like it just drops. And then that meat, provides, 350 to 400 pounds of amazing meat. So, I think it's, it's a complicated experience. And every time, there's always something there. Like today, I'm very aware that I'm field harvesting tomorrow. And tomorrow morning when I wake up, it'll just be a different feeling than waking up this morning. And I ultimately just think that's a good thing. I think taking it seriously and being impacted by it is a good thing. Both, for a whole bunch of reasons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's amazing to just hear your perspective and just understand everything that you're going through to really like provide your community with the most nutrient dense form of animal protein possible. And I think Harry had touched on this, but we're fortunate because we're in Austin. We're like an hour and a half away from Rome Ranch out in Fredericksburg, Texas. So we've been to a few different bison harvests out there, and it was just one of those experiences that just completely changed your perspective on food and death. And like every time you go pick up meat from the grocery store, like you start to think about the death and everything that went into providing you with that protein. So we've been trying to encourage a lot of our friends that eat a lot of meat. If you're not into hunting, you should just buy a ticket and go to this Rome Ranch event. And, it's not the cheapest ticket in the world, but like what you will get, the perspective that you'll learn from that experience, it's like it will forever change your relationship with food.
Absolutely. 100%. Yeah. Well said.
Yeah. Not to change gears, but I just had a question for you that I wanted to ask prior to jumping on. I feel like there's a lot of like differing information about the nutritional value of bison. And what I mean by that is I've heard that, all like legally all bison are grass fed. And then I've heard there's a lot of greenwashing around bison and a lot of them are actually grain finished. I was just curious if you have like a perspective on that.
Yeah. So, the facts are that the majority of bison that are, at a grocery store or at a restaurant in Austin or a restaurant in Bozeman, they're all born on ranches. They grow up on grass, but the vast majority are finished on grain and feedlots. Mm-hmm. And so I think, I think your average consumer thinks that, they see pictures of bison, roaming beautiful prairies and assume that they just eat, the beautiful prairie grass and then end up on your plate. And the reality is different. So that's those are the facts around the bison world.
Got it. Yeah. I know that there are some companies that actually sell bison tallow. So if it's a grass finished bison, is there enough fat on the animal to actually make tallow?
Well, I'll say I don't know. Only reason is I've never made tallow.
Got it.
But our animals, which are, grass-fed, grass-finished, so back up a sec, I'm like obsessed with the process, and we like keep it really simple here. We ultimately do two things, or try to do two things: raise bison as well and as in sync with nature as possible, and try to provide our customers with amazing meat. So tomorrow, for example, after I kill that bison, we're also big believers, as I know you guys are, and one of the reasons I love your work and James's work and Diana's work is just informing people about like meat and the food industry and the reality of, and the bullshit around like plant-based meat and all that stuff. And so we love to say, like, eat with your eyes wide open. And we're all about, transparency and trying to connect our customers to where their food comes from and trying to help them, deepen their relationship with food and nature, like you were just talking about, Brett. And so I always take a few pictures during before I kill the bison, picture of the herd, picture of a dead bison, picture at the butcher when it's up on the rail. Like, I think a fresh, bison carcass is like a beautiful thing. And anyway, so I've become like really close friends with the folks at our butcher shop. And we're always talking about like, meat and carcass quality and this and that. And it's a long way of saying our animals have great fat coverage. And like if you were to buy a quarter, half, or whole bison from us, the ground bison is 100% would 100% be from your animal. So they're using bison fat from that animal to make the ground bison. And then when there's extra fat left over, they'll package it for me. And I actually use that bison fat for like when I grind deer burger or elk burger here, I use bison fat. And I literally, we just made a big batch of bone broth from our marrow bones, like Sunday, and each jar, once it is in the fridge, there's like a thick yellow fat cap on it. And I take that out. And so that's rendered bison fat. I just put it in some eggs. So I don't know how to make tallow. I haven't done it, but there's a lot, there's a plenty of fat on the animal. I guess you don't get the intramuscular marbling, but there's good, a good healthy bison should have good fat coverage, good back fat. And like, yeah, I mean, it's funny. I can, have killed enough bison at this point and gutted enough bison, field dressed enough that like, it's cool when, we're, like I said, at Amsterdam, the butcher we work with, we're obsessed with carcass quality and making sure that like we always have, like if for whatever reason when they skinned it and everything, got up on the rail, we're like, this one's a little skinny. Like we wouldn't sell that, we wouldn't send that to our customers. We would just, probably have it ground into ground bison and keep it for ourselves. Fortunately, like that hasn't happened. But some animals are bigger than others. And when I like tomorrow, like when I'm cutting its head off and opening it up and going in, like often, they're typically like, there's just lots of fat, and particularly this time of year, like it's winter in Montana, it's cold. They want to have a lot of fat on that body. So there's a lot of fat around the animal, around a healthy animal, just not the intramuscular fat.
Matt, are there any resources that you tend to point people towards when they ask you about regenerative agriculture or just learning more about bison? Because there's just so many great people out there. I wonder if you have any ones in particular that resonate with you.
Yeah, I think, for bison, for the animal and like the story, the book I always recommend, because it's full of information and it's an absolute page turner, is American Buffalo by Steve Rinella. He's the founder of Meat Eater and has actually become a friend. He was just up here with his kids recently. He's an awesome guy. So American Buffalo. And then another one is The Last Stand by Michael Punke. It's like Puhke or Nke. It's a story of like George Bird Grinnell and saving the American buffalo. So those are a couple of great books on the animal. And then on regenerative agriculture, I think our Nicole Masters, who's become a friend, she's this like incredible soil scientist. So she's on a lot of podcasts. Anything by Nicole, and then Fred Provenza is another just incredible man, really big thinker, great scientist. He has a book called Nourishment that I keep saying I'm going to finish it. I haven't finished it, but and then what else? I subscribe to the Stockman Grass Farmer. It's just it's a little more nuts and bolts. Comes out each month, but it's really interesting. I love it. I look whenever it shows up, I get excited. So I think those are, and then like the Savory Institute, holistic. I think it's HMI, Holistic Management International. Those two groups are both outstanding. I'm sure I'm forgetting others, but those are some of the main ones that come to mind.
Nice. Matt, if we live in Austin, can we buy bison from you? Do you guys ship across the country?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we ship all over the country. We just this week, we shipped to Vermont, Chicago, Minnesota, Tennessee, and Colorado. But anyways, no, yeah, we we ship UPS 2-day air, or if it can get there in 2 days, UPS ground. But we ship all over the country, and piece of cake. And we've shipped to Texas multiple times.
Sweet.
Perfect, man. We'll link to all that in the show notes. But Matt, so appreciate your time, man. It's so great to meet you and just learn more about your story and everything that you and your family are doing at North Bridger. And just can't thank you enough for coming on the show and sitting down with us. So thank you.
Oh man, no, thank you guys. I really appreciate you having me on and being interested in our story, and love what you guys are doing. And yeah, it's awesome. So keep up the great work. And I look forward, we will definitely meet in person, whether it's in Montana or Texas. So look forward to the next one being in person.
Let's do it.
Cool.
Appreciate that.
All right.
Thanks.